I never imagined, as a Southeast Iowa small town farm girl, that I would get the chance to explore 17 countries and 30-something states. But I did. I got the opportunity during my undergraduate degree to head to Bulgaria for a semester, and I spent about 4.5 months there traveling, learning the culture, and learning the cultures around Bulgaria. For those of you that don't know where the country is, because I have to admit, before I went, I didn't know where it was either. It's just north of Greece, and so has Mediterranean influences. It's close to Turkey and has Turkish influences, Macedonia, other countries surround it, a Slavic country, and also a post-communist country, part of the Soviet bloc. In 1991, it broke out of that bloc, but still very much a Soviet mindset country. The infrastructure looks Soviet regime, very bureaucratic infrastructure. So as I traveled to Bulgaria, which was the first time in a long time I had been abroad, I was excited at the opportunity. And when I got to Bulgaria, I met a group of students from other American universities, and we quickly became friends. And during our time there, we would travel pretty frequently because none of us scheduled Friday classes, because really, who's there to study when you're studying abroad? So one of the first weekends we get there, we take a Friday trip, and we decide, let's go to Istanbul in Turkey. So we get on a bus. It was about an 8-hour bus ride, and we're about halfway there, and we make a pit stop at the rest stop, go to the restroom, grab something to eat and drink, and I thought, well, we're stopped, I might as well use the restroom. And I'd been to Europe before, so I kind of should have been in the mindset of sometimes you have to pay to use the restroom. You have to pay 50 cents, $1, whatever it might be. It's not like here in America where you can just pull off and use a rest area, rest stop, or a gas station. They often charge you to use the restroom. So I pay my 50 cents or whatever it was at that time, and this is what I paid to use. For the women in the room, I'm sure you'll appreciate this. It was basically a porcelain hole in the floor that I just paid to use. No running water, no water really of any kind. And I was just blown away that this is the infrastructure that they were using there in Bulgaria. And I think at that time this was one that we found in Bulgaria. I don't think we were in Turkey yet. But this was very common for that part of Europe, Eastern Europe, to have something like this as the main bathroom. So while this is an entertaining story that I often like to tell when I am talking to folks across the industry, the reason I bring it up is because when you look at what we have here in America, infrastructure, technology, what we have going for us in agriculture and in other industries, we are miles and miles ahead of countries like Bulgaria, of countries like India, parts of South America, those countries that are still really developing their global systems. So that's what I want to talk to you about today, is just this quick snapshot of the things I've seen in agriculture and why, quite frankly, I'm excited for the future of agriculture and for the future of other industries related to agriculture. This is a quick snapshot here of the fiscal year 2017 and what we did in trade exports. It was about $140.5 billion that we exported out of the United States in agricultural goods. Of course, our top trading partners here, you can see the top 6 that we have: China, Canada and Mexico, Japan, European Union, and South Korea. And of these 6 countries, we have 3, well, we're working towards 3 trade agreements with at least some of these countries up here, and we're going to get to that a little bit later today. But as you think about producing food for a world platform, these are the countries that we're producing food for right here in this part of Iowa. This is a little bit more of a snapshot of what we exported last year in 2017. Of course, soy is a huge agricultural export for us, and I'm sure we have maybe some soybean farmers in the room. A concern right now, of course, is the tariffs or potential tariffs that China could place on U.S. commodities, and soybeans is a big one that I hear from farmers a lot, and I'll touch on that just a little bit later. I thought this was an interesting infographic because it really gives you an idea of where we're sending our exports and also what we're exporting. I was surprised to see that Iowa's biggest export is actually machinery. I would have thought it was pork, soybeans, potentially corn, but when you look at what we're sending overseas, the biggest thing that we're sending is actually machinery. And then lastly, here's just a quick snapshot of Iowa's agricultural exports. We're number 1 in pork, number 1 in corn, number 1 in feed grain exports or feedstuffs, number 2 in soybeans, and number 5 in feedlot operations. So right here in Iowa, we are literally producing food that feeds the entire world. I want to tell another quick story here before I explain the pictures. As the moderator explained, I host a daily podcast, Ag News Daily. And for those of you that don't know what a podcast is, because I had to explain it to my dad when I first started it, it's basically like a radio program for your cell phone. It's like Netflix, but you're listening instead of watching something. So we started a podcast, Mike Pearson and I, and got a couple sponsors. We're working with a group out of Chicago, a trading firm, the Zahner Group. And we thought, it would be great to go to Chicago, visit the trade floor, visit the Board of Trade, and visit their offices and take them out for a nice steak dinner, because when you want to celebrate something, you want to go out to eat, a lot of times people pick protein or steak. So we head to Chicago, middle of October, it was a rainy day, pick them up from their offices and say, where should we go for dinner? You pick our treat, we'll take you out. And so we go to a nice steakhouse. It was called RPM Steakhouse, Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening, early evening. We walk in, and it is packed on this rainy, cold, blustery day in downtown Chicago. On a Tuesday afternoon, late evening, or early evening, packed. So we sit down, we order our steaks, it's family-styled sides. All our food comes, we order drinks, and all the food was fantastic. Great cuts of meat. The meat was all locally sourced or American beef, certified American Angus. Definitely put the value on buying U.S. commodities and selling those directly to their consumers there at the restaurant. Then the bill comes, and I had a little bit of a sticker shock value, because for 4 people, we spent nearly $1,000 on a 2-course or 3-course steak dinner for our clients. And for somebody that has been originally from Southeast Iowa, a small town, I was blown away. I mean, $1,000 is what I pay for my rent in Des Moines, and I just blew it on one steak dinner. It was a great dinner, don't get me wrong, but the mindset, I think, behind a lot of these people and a little bit about the domestic culture that we have here is there's so much emphasis placed on who's telling the best story. I get to work in the media every day, so I get to help spin that story of agriculture. And that restaurant is telling a great story, because on a Tuesday night, it's packed. And for 4 people to drop $1,000 on a Tuesday night, they know what they're doing. They're telling that story. They're telling agriculture's story. They're helping to tell our story as producers. So then when we look internationally, this is another picture from Bulgaria, some more of the infrastructure that you can see there. Post-Soviet, of course, as I mentioned, you can see it looks very regimented, dark colors. They wear a lot of dark colors, kind of maybe a darker mindset. And then when you look at their agriculture system, these are some pictures that we took, and not all of these are my pictures, some of them are from my friends, but these are some pictures from their agricultural systems. A lot of it is still done by hand. They don't have a lot of equipment. And the thing that absolutely blew me away while I was there is I never saw a cow anywhere in the entire country while I was there for 4.5 months. And being from a beef farm, I was like, I need some beef. I need a steak, I need a hamburger, I need something. So we would go out to eat, and I would see a hamburger, and it's like, do I order that hamburger? Because there's no cows, so obviously it's not from this country. What am I getting? So I did order a hamburger one time, and I thought, this doesn't taste like beef, it doesn't really look like beef, I don't really know what I'm eating. So the whole time I was there, I was just craving beef, and when I got home, I would eat hamburgers, and my mom was like, You've never ate hamburgers like this before. And I said, well, I haven't had it for 4.5 months, and it was just blew my mind that they don't have that type of production that we have here in the United States. They grow a lot of small crops, specialty crops like olives and grapes, tomatoes, things you can hand pick pretty easily. And then for their livestock, they focus a lot on the smaller animals, goats, chickens, pigs, things that they can keep right there in their backyard or in some cases in their homes. So when we look at the current trade environment right now, there are a lot of things going on in current trade climate that has some people in agriculture nervous. When we look at big trade issues, TPP is a huge one right now. We had pulled out. President Trump said that was not a good deal for Americans, withdrew us. TPP has gone ahead and signed without us. The 11 countries remaining have signed an agreement. And now President Trump recently issued a statement to his advisor, his economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, saying, please look into this. Maybe we want back into it. I don't know what kind of deal we're going to get, but let's re-examine this, because at the end of the day, President Trump wants to find the best deal for Americans, for American producers, for American manufacturers. Whether you love the guy or hate the guy, he is trying to protect American interests. When we look at Nafta right now, we're on our 7th or 8th round of Nafta negotiations. Had one wrap up today, actually. The top 3 trade ministers for each of the countries were meeting to see if they could streamline some of that process and get us hopefully closer to a trade deal, as Mexico is heading into a political season here soon, which could definitely stall Nafta talks, and it has a lot of people in the industry worried. Nafta, of course, is with our two of our biggest trading partners, Mexico and Canada. And at the end, I get asked this question a lot. Do you think we're going to pull out of Nafta? Do you think China will put tariffs on US agricultural commodities? And that's a tough question to tackle, because when you look at what's going on right now, President Trump wants to get the best deal for Americans. However, I think people realize at the end of the day, people rely on the US for agricultural goods, for soybeans, for pork, for corn, for soy meal, for the ag products we produce here, because our products are safe, they're reliable, we use reliable technology, and people trust the food that's coming from America to be safe and reliable, and they know that they can rely on it. When you look at NAFTA specifically, Mexico and Canada are 2 adjacent countries, geographically adjacent countries to the United States, and it's cheapest for them to get those products sent to their countries by rail, by truck, by car. And so at the end of the day, no, I don't think we will pull out of negotiations like NAFTA. And I think President Trump does want to look at negotiations like TPP and Chorus. And just at the end of the day, try to protect our interests here in rural America. And finally, of course, as I mentioned, China is a big one right now in American agriculture that has a lot of people nervous. I work really closely with a lot of market analysts. Of course, as host of Market to Market, I get one on the show every week. So I get to pick their brains a lot and say, what's going on? What's going on in agriculture? Should we be concerned about this? And the China one is one that's come up a lot, because a lot of producers are nervous. Should I be switching acres from beans to corn? Should I be looking to plant less beans this year in the wake of a potential trade war? And the analysts that I've all talked to have said, it is scary, and it's not something that we should disregard, but at the end of the day, China needs that feed stuff. They need the beans. They are sourcing quite a bit of beans already from Latin American countries like Brazil and Argentina, because they're our biggest bean competitors right now. But at the end of the day, if China needs the beans, and they have a really high protein diet and rely heavily on soybeans for a lot of that diet, they're going to source it from somewhere, and it's probably going to be the US. Brazil and Argentina can't supply their entire need. So when those announcements came out about the potential trade tariffs, the markets did react. They did react. We traded 40 to 50 cents lower on the day, but they sprang back quickly, and I think that shows that producers should be hesitant and should be watching, but at the end of the day, I don't think we should be too worried at this point in time. Lastly, when we look at markets that are expanding, there are so many markets in agriculture that we have untapped. The biggest one I think coming up is India. When we look at India's economy and population, they have about 1.3 billion people, and that's expanding every day. They're one of the most rapidly growing populations. And when you look at a breakdown of their religion, and I'll explain why in a moment, they're about 80% Hindu, 13% Muslim, 2% Christian, and 5% other religions like Buddhism, no religion, etc. So why am I bringing up the religion factor? Well, of course, Muslims, they don't eat pork. Hindus don't eat beef. Christians, either way. I mean, they also have a really large vegetarian population. And it's interesting when you think about that, because you think 80% of their population is Hindu. They're not eating cows. They consider it a sacred animal. However, a study that I read just a couple days ago by some of their research agencies there in India showed that 15% of the population eats beef. And when you consider the population of 1.3 billion people, billion with a B, that equivalates about 180 million people in their country that are consuming beef. That's over half of the United States population, just in that one country alone, that are consuming beef, let alone the 80% of Muslims, or the 80% of Hindus who are consuming pork and chicken and some of those other products. So that market is huge. And there's markets like this that are out there that we have untapped potential. Africa is another big one. A lot of trade analysts expect to see grow here in the coming years. And I think that one's a little more longer term, 15, 20, 25 years out. But there are still so many ways for us to expand what we're doing here in agriculture and what we're doing here specifically in Iowa agriculture. This is an interesting graphic I found, and it's not really meant to be read or understood, but I think it really highlights how complex our international and our global agricultural system is. And I think a lot of farmers forget that at the end of the day, while you are growing commodities in your backyard, on your farms, you're feeding the world. I think it's 155 people that every American farmer feeds worldwide. And people are coming to us because, of course, as I mentioned, our food is safe, our food is reliable, and we know how to produce it well. Sorry about that. So I want to end on one quick story. I had the opportunity to go to Japan a couple of years ago, and it's really interesting because their population is older, 65 plus is what they're looking at, and it's made up of a bunch of little tiny islands. Their farmable ground is very small compared to their total ground that they have in the country. So they have to do things a lot differently than what we do here in America. They grow a lot of rice. That's a staple food for their diet. Not a lot of production livestock like what we might see here with hogs and cattle. However, they do have some livestock. But when you look at what they're doing, compared to what the US is doing, it's very, very different. And then when you look at what they're doing with their food system, very different as well. I compare it as the US places a huge emphasis on quantity. How can I improve my yields? How can I get more cattle through? How can I finish more feeder hogs? In Japan and some of these other countries that have a long history of culture, they're thinking at it from a mindset of, what can I do to improve the quality of the small food that I'm producing? We visited a dairy farm while we were there, and it was about 60 head that they milked. And for them, that was considered a pretty good-sized operation. And they're constantly asking themselves, how can I make my operation better? What can I do to improve my food source that I'm providing to the people of Japan? And so one day we also got to tour a grocery store. And it was very interesting because the manager that was walking us around and giving us a tour of the facility said, he took us to the meat counter or the meat aisle and said, do you see all this meat on the shelf right now? Yes, okay, great. What's so special about it? He said, the meat that you see right here, right now, is not going to be the same meat that you see if you came back this afternoon. They're constantly recycling their food, they want fresh food, and their consumers are willing to pay a lot more for it. For example, this watermelon picture right here, as you can see, it's 1,843 yen, and at that time, 100 yen was approximately equivalent to $1 US. So they were paying $18.43 for this one watermelon. Didn't look any different than a watermelon I would get here in the United States. But they knew where their food was coming from, and they were willing to pay that premium. So I guess where I want to end about why I'm excited about agriculture is, even though we see people doing things differently than us, we see people raising organics, we see people raising non-GMO corn or soybeans, or using cover crops on their operations. At the end of the day, everyone's money is green, and if that's what works for your operation and you've found a way to market yourself and market your niche, I think you should do it. And I think that that's why agriculture is such an exciting time right now, is because we have markets like this that are going to be our future for agriculture. Thank you.